Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something.
Hmm.
It's highly specific, but it is absolutely foundational.
Foundational is definitely the right word.
We are going deep into the source material, covering osseous tissue and, well, the entire skeletal system. And this stuff can be dense.
He can be.
So our goal is to synthesize it all, to build this mental framework for you that's so clear, so descriptive, you won't even need to look at a diagram to understand how this whole system works.
And you know, it's the perfect topic for this because the skeleton is so wildly misunderstood. Most people just think of it as static scaffolding.
Or coat rack.
Exactly, just a coat rack for your organs. But it's an incredibly dynamic organ system. To really get it, we have to start with its job description, which is way more than just support.
Okay, let's do it. Let's start big picture. What are the 5 essential functions? We know structural support is number 1.
Right. First, structural support. It's the framework. It's the anchor point for pretty much everything else. Soft tissues, muscles, you name it. But let's jump straight to number 2, which is arguably the most critical for your body's overall balance, for homeostasis. And that's mineral storage.
The body's mineral bank.
It is the central bank. Your body stores huge amounts of calcium and phosphate in your bones. I mean, we're talking over 98% of your body's total calcium.
Wow.
And this isn't just about keeping the bones strong. It's a vital reserve. If your calcium levels in your blood drop even a little, things like nerve signals, muscle contractions, they start to fail.
So the skeleton is the backup generator.
It's the ultimate reservoir. It makes sure those life-sustaining processes never, ever run dry.
That completely shifts the perspective. So the bones are strong because they need to store all that calcium, not just the other way around. Okay, what are the other 3?
Okay, third is blood cell production. Deep inside some bones, you've got red marrow. It's basically the factory for all your red blood cells, most white blood cells, and platelets.
Right.
Fourth is, well, it's the obvious one, but it's critical. Protection.
Yeah.
The skull protects your brain. The vertebrae protect the spinal cord, your ribs.
Heart and lungs.
Shield the heart and lungs. And finally, number 5 is leverage. Your bones act as levers, which lets your muscles apply force and gives us the ability to move with incredible precision and power.
That's a powerful why. Okay, so let's unpack this. Let's get right down to the fundamental construction. If we were to look inside a bone, at the bone matrix, what makes it such a brilliant piece of biological engineering?
It's all about the combination of, well, the hard and the flexible. Think of it like reinforced concrete.
Okay.
About 2/3 of the bone's weight is inorganic. It's mostly calcium phosphate. And that forms these crystals called hydroxyapatite.
Hydroxyapatite.
And these crystals are incredible at resisting compression. They're extremely strong when you put weight on them.
So great for bearing weight, but I imagine they'd be brittle. They'd shatter if you tried to bend them.
Exactly, which is why you need the other part. About 1/3 of the weight is the organic matrix, and that's mostly collagen fibers.
The flexible part.
The flexible part. Collagen is tough, it's pliable, and it gives the bone its tensile strength. It resists stretching, twisting, bending. It's like the steel rebar in the concrete.
So the final material has this perfect intermediate strength. It's rigid, but it has just enough give.
It can support weight, but it can also absorb impacts without just snapping. It's genius.
It really is. Okay, so within this matrix, you have this constant, this dynamic cellular drama playing out. Let's meet the 4 key cell types that make bone a living, adaptive tissue. Who are the maintenance workers?
We start with the osteocytes. These are the mature bone cells. You can think of them as the retired builders. They've been completely surrounded by the matrix they helped create.
And they live in these little pockets,
Right.
lacunae, right?
Right, in lacunae. And their job, once they're embedded, is to be the monitors, the maintenance crew. They're constantly regulating the mineral and protein content of the matrix around them.
So they're like little sensors.
Exactly. And they aren't isolated. They have these long, thin arms, basically, that reach out through tiny channels called connective.
Connective.
And that's how they stay in contact with each other. And, most importantly, with the blood supply. They are the bone's sensor network.
So if the osteocytes are monitoring things, we need the active players who determine the balance, the builders and the demolishers. Let's talk about the osteoblasts.
Osteoblasts are the construction workers. They are responsible for osteogenesis, the production of new bone.
Okay.
They secrete this organic matrix called osteoid, which is full of collagen, and then they trigger the deposit of calcium salts that mineralize it. And here's the key thing. Once an osteoblast gets completely walled in by the matrix it just built.
It retires.
It differentiates and becomes an osteocyte. It switches from building to monitoring.
And where do these powerful builders even come from?
They come from osteoprogenitor cells.
Yeah.
These are the stem cells. Think of them as the general contractors. They're found in the linings of the bone, and they're always dividing to make sure there's a fresh supply of osteoblasts. Absolutely critical for healing.
And that brings us to the antagonists, the destroyers.
Yeah.
The osteoclasts. Why are they so big?
They're huge multinucleate cells. And their job is osteolysis, the controlled erosion of the bone matrix.
How do they do that?
They basically secrete powerful acids and enzymes that dissolve the matrix, breaking it down and releasing that stored calcium and phosphate back into the bloodstream. They are the essential link to that mineral bank we talked about.
So the critical takeaway here is this constant tension, this balance. If the osteoclasts become too dominant, what happens?
If osteoclast activity outpaces osteoblast activity, you get a net loss of bone mass. The bones get weaker. This is exactly what happens in aging or in a disease like osteoporosis.
And the opposite is true for getting stronger.
Right. If you apply a lot of mechanical stress, osteoblast activity ramps up and the bones become stronger and more massive. It's a balance that's constantly responding to your body's needs.
Okay, so let's zoom out from the microscopic to the architectural level. We've got two main types of bone tissue, compact bone and spongy bone.
And they serve totally different functions. Compact bone, or dense bone, is solid. It's the superficial layer, the cortex, and it forms the thick walls of long bones.
And then inside?
Inside you find spongy bone. It's also called cancellous or trabecular bone. And it's this open network of little struts and plates called trabeculae.
So compact bone is the tough outer shell, and spongy bone is the internal lightweight bracing system.
Perfectly put.
Yeah.
And that open network in spongy bone makes the skeleton so much lighter,
Yeah.
which makes it easier for us to move, but it still provides incredible structural support.
Let's focus on that compact bone shell for a minute because its functional unit, the osteon, is just. It's one of the most elegant structures in the body. How can we picture this Haversian system without a diagram?
Okay, imagine looking down the cut end of a tree trunk at the rings.
Right.
The osteon is like that. It's a series of concentric layers, or lamellae, arranged around a central canal. And in that central canal, you have the blood vessels and nerves that feed the bone.
And the osteocytes live in those layers, the lamellae.
They live in their little lacunae within those lamellae. And that central canal runs parallel to the long axis of the bone.
Okay, so how do nutrients from that central canal get out to all the cells? And how do they connect deeper into the bone?
That's where the perforating canals come in, or Volkmann's canals, if the central canals are the main north-south highways.
The perforating canals are the east-west side streets.
Exactly. They run perpendicular, connecting the central canals to each other and linking them to the blood supply on the outside of the bone and in the medullary cavity on the inside.
That's an amazing system. So let's talk about how this structure manages stress. How does compact bone handle force compared to spongy bone?
Compact bone is unbelievably strong when force is applied along its axis. It's like a drinking straw. Perfect for the shaft of a long bone, like your femur, which takes predictable vertical stress.
What if you hit it from the side?
It fractures much more easily. It's not designed for that.
And spongy bone is the multidirectional shock absorber.
Precisely. The trabeculae in spongy bone aren't random. They're aligned along the lines of mechanical stress. It's like a cross-braced lattice that can handle complex forces from many different directions. That's why you find it in the ends of long bones, at the joints.
Okay, let's quickly define the parts of a typical long bone, like the femur, the shaft, the ends, the coverings.
Okay, the main tubular shaft is the diaphysis. It surrounds that hollow medullary cavity where you find the marrow.
Got it.
The expanded ends of the bone are the epiphyses. They're mostly spongy bone. And that little narrow zone connecting the two is the metaphysis.
And what about that crucial outer skin of the bone?
That's the periosteum. It's got two layers, an outer fibrous layer that protects the bone and anchors tendons using these really strong collagen threads called perforating fibers.
And the inner layer.
The inner layer is the osteogenic layer. It's packed with those osteoprogenitor stem cells we talked about, crucial for growth and repair. And then on the very inside, lining the medullary cavity, you have a thin layer called the endosteum.
All right, let's shift to development. How bone forms ossification. It's important to first clarify the difference between that and just calcification.
Right. Good distinction. Calcification is just depositing calcium salts into any tissue. It can happen in lots of places. Ossification is the specific, highly structured process of replacing another tissue with actual bone tissue.
And during fetal development, this happens in two different ways.
Two fundamentally different ways. The first is intramembranous ossification. This is where bone develops directly from fibrous connective tissue. There's no cartilage model first.
What a template.
No template, just forms right there. This is how the flat bones of the skull roof, the clavicle, and the mandible are formed.
And the second, more common method, the one that does use a model.
That's endochondral ossification. This is where a hyaline cartilage model is laid down first, like a template, and then is gradually destroyed and replaced by bone. This is how most of your skeleton forms, limbs, vertebrae, all of that.
So how does that process translate into a bone getting longer? That involves this constant race between different cell activities at the growth plate.
It's a fascinating process.
Yeah.
It all happens at the epiphyseal cartilage, the growth plate, which is in the metaphysis. Imagine a conveyor belt. On the side closer to the epiphysis, new cartilage is being added.
Pushing the end of the bone further away.
Exactly. And at the same time, on the side closer to the diaphysis, the shaft, osteoblasts are invading that older cartilage and replacing it with bone. As long as cartilage production keeps up with bone replacement, the bone gets longer.
And when we stop growing, that balance just tips.
It tips. When you reach maturity, the cartilage growth slows down, but the bone replacement speeds up until the entire plate is converted to bone. And that's epiphyseal closure. It leaves behind that faint epiphyseal line, which is what doctors look at on an X-ray to see if someone is done growing.
And at the same time, the bone is also getting wider.
Right, that's appositional growth. It's simpler. Osteoblasts in the periosteum just add new layers to the outside, like rings on a tree. And to keep the bone from getting too heavy, osteoclasts on the inside remove a little bit of bone, widening the medullary cavity.
This whole process of growth and maintenance is, of course, highly regulated. What are the key nutritional and hormonal factors we need?
Well, you obviously need a constant supply of calcium and phosphate, but you also need key vitamins. Vitamin A helps osteoblasts. Vitamin C is essential for making collagen. And vitamin D is absolutely critical.
Why D specifically?
Because its active form, calcitriol, is what allows your gut to absorb calcium in the first place. Without enough vitamin D, you can eat all the calcium you want, but you can't mineralize your bones properly.
And the hormones.
It's a tightrope walk. You have parathyroid hormone, or PTH, which raises blood calcium by telling osteoclasts to break down bone. Its opponent is calcitonin, which is released when calcium is too high. It tells the osteoclast to slow down. And then you have growth hormone and thyroxine, keeping the growth plates active until puberty, when sex hormones come in and cause that final growth spurt and closure.
This is where it gets really amazing for me. The dynamism. People think of bones as static, but they're constantly being remodeled. Just how active is this turnover?
It's incredibly active. About 1/5, 20% of your entire adult skeleton is broken down and rebuilt every single year.
1/5 a year.
And in high-stress areas like the spongy bone in the head of your femur, that turnover can be way higher, maybe 2 or 3 times a year.
Which means the bone is supremely adaptable. Its structure literally reflects the forces you put on it.
Absolutely. Bones under heavy stress get visibly thicker and stronger. And it's thought to be driven by these tiny electrical fields that are generated when the mineral crystals are stressed.
So the builders, the osteoblasts, are drawn to the stress.
They're drawn to it. And the flip side is true. If you mobilize a bone, put it in a cast, it loses mass rapidly. It needs that physical demand.
Let's talk about what happens when that demand exceeds the bone's capacity of fracture. The source lists a lot of types. How can we categorize them?
The first big distinction is whether they break the skin, open or compound or not, closed or simple. Then you have shapes, like transverse, straight across, or spiral from a twisting force, or comminuted where it's shattered.
Any that are particularly important clinically.
Definitely. You watch for epiphyseal fractures in kids because damaging the growth plate can stunt growth. And then you have named ones like a Colles fracture in the wrist or a Potts fracture at the ankle.
But no matter the type, the healing process follows 4 pretty predictable steps.
4 main steps. Step 1, a ton of bleeding. A big blood clot, the fractured hematoma, forms immediately.
Okay.
Step 2, the calluses form. An internal callus of spongy bone starts to bridge the gap on the inside, and an external callus of cartilage and bone forms on the outside to stabilize the whole thing.
Like a natural splint.
It is a natural splint. Then, step 3, that cartilage in the external callus is replaced by bone, fully uniting the broken ends. And finally, step 4, remodeling, Over months, even years, osteoclasts and osteoblasts reshape that area. And what's amazing is the repaired spot is often a little thicker and stronger than the original bone.
Before we wrap up, let's just quickly run through the 7 classifications of bones by shape.
Sure, you have long bones like the femur, short bones, which are boxy like your wrist bones, and flat bones like the sternum or the skull roof.
Right. And then the weird ones.
Then the irregular bones like vertebrae with their complex shapes. Then 3 more specialized types.
What are they?
Sesamoid bones, which develop inside tendons like your kneecap. Sutural bones, which are little extra bones found in the sutures of the skull. And finally, pneumatized bones, which are hollow like the ethmoid bone in your face.
Okay. Final section. Let's touch on clinical relevance and how the system connects to everything else. What's the fundamental cause of age-related bone loss?
It comes right back to that cellular imbalance. Around age 30 or 40, everyone starts to experience a gradual reduction in bone mass called osteopenia.
And why does that happen?
It's because osteoblast activity, the building, naturally starts to decline a bit faster than osteoclast activity, the demolition. The destroyers just start to outrun the builders.
And when that loss becomes severe, it gets a new name, osteoporosis.
Exactly. That's when the bone loss is so significant it actually compromises function. And it's much more severe in postmenopausal women because the drop in estrogen removes a key signal that helps keep those osteoblasts active.
We also saw mention of things like dwarfism and bone softening.
Right. Achondroplasia is a disorder where the cartilage in the growth plates grows too slowly, leading to short limbs. And then you have osteomalacia in adults, or rickets in kids, which is where bones become soft because they lack minerals, usually because of a vitamin D deficiency.
So to bring it all home, how does this incredibly complex, dynamic system integrate with the rest of the body?
It's the ultimate connector. It provides the levers for the muscular system. It's tied directly to the cardiovascular system through its blood supply and its role in making blood cells.
Right.
The endocrine system is its boss, controlling its growth and metabolism.
Yeah.
And never forget the nervous system. Bones are heavily innervated with sensory nerves, especially in the periosteum, which is why a bone injury is so intensely painful.
This has been a phenomenal deep dive. We started with the 5 functions. We went into the architectural genius of the matrix, the cellular drama, how the skeleton grows, adapts, and heals. The sheer complexity is just, it's breathtaking.
I think the key thing to take away is just how much of your current skeleton is an active, dynamic response to your life. So it leaves you with a question to think about.
Okay.
Given that bone adapts so quickly to stress,
Yeah.
ask yourself this. How much of your skeleton's current shape reflects the sports you played 20 years ago? And how much of it has been actively re-engineered by the physical demands you put on your body just last week? It is a perpetual, adaptable architectural project happening inside you right now.
A constantly evolving masterpiece under our skin. That's a fantastic thought to end on. Thank you for sharing your sources and engaging in this deep dive into the human skeletal system. We hope this has provided all of you with a clear, retainable framework for understanding these core anatomical concepts.